In order to improve your game, you must study the endgame before everything else. That's what the third world champion Capablanca said, and I'm realizing how correct he is. In my last tournament in Italy, 8 out of 9 games reached the endgame. In round 4, I was leading the tournament with 3 wins, and I reached this better endgame against the top seed Grandmaster Marin. But I got completely gapped and lost. That was a turning point in the tournament for me. I never fully recovered from that spanking and couldn't make my Grandmaster norm. So endgame training is going to be a top priority for us. This video isn't about endgame theory, it's about action. We're going to learn from 2 top Chinese Grandmasters who have been gapping other top Grandmasters in the endgame at the Chess Olympiad by looking at their endgames, which are super instructive and absolutely clutch. GM training starts now. In round 4 of the Olympiad, China was matched against Armenia, and we're going to follow Ri Yangyi against Gabriel Sargsyan. Now, the game starts as in English, but quickly transposes to a Queen's Gambit decline, which is known to be very solid. And I'll flow through the moves quickly so you can see how we reach the endgame. But essentially, White gets a very small advantage here against the isolated Queen's pawn, and Yangyi here plays a very smart move, putting Black in a nasty pin. And here, Gabriel has to decide to either allow this pin or try and do something concrete, which is what he goes for. But the downside is you end up with a weaker king. And here Yangyi plays it very precisely to obtain just a very small edge. Even though all the materials even, there's pressure on the 2 bishops. And here Gabriel decides, I'm going to liquidate and try and save this in an endgame. And he plays very concretely here. And we reach this position where Yangyi is a pawn up, but there's a forcing sequence here to go into an endgame. And this is the start of the endgame, where the computer says it's not enough for a win. It says like a small edge, 0.3, 0.4. And the game situation, the match situation here is 1.5, 1.5. So the whole match rests on this one game. And Yangyi has this tiny edge, which he needs to try and grind out. The reason it's difficult to win is because these opposite color bishops make it very, very difficult. And black is very active. But the way Yangyi plays this is just perfection. So here, how do you start? First of all, you gotta try and activate your pieces, right? So how do we activate the pieces? He starts with using the F rook to, whilst gaining tempo, to hit the bishop. Very logical. The bishop drops back, and here we also need to limit counterplay. If this rook comes in onto our second rank, it's gonna be trouble. So the rook goes to the second rank. Now black pushes the pawn up. One thing when you're in an endgame is you're happy to trade pawns. So he's taking some space here. Potentially it would have been smarter to move the rook in, but this is also a very legitimate move if he follows up correctly. And now the next 2 moves are so key for White to press for the win here. And that's to do with this bishop. This bishop looks decent, but it's hitting air. Like, black can just play around it. And this bishop gets put on a much, much better place. If you think about where this bishop wants to be, actually it would be much better on c3. Right? It's controlling this diagonal to limit the black king, and it's also holding together this pawn and hitting this pawn on a5. So here Yangyi goes f3, kicking the rook, and bishop swings to e5, and it's ready to go to c3. After rook c8, this move is key as well. So in this position, actually, fixing this pawn is very, very important. Potentially, black should be thinking about pushing this pawn 1 square to a4, because you'll see later on in the game that this pawn becomes a big problem on a dark square. So when you have these bishops, you want to think about where to put the pawns. Normally you want to put pawns on opposite color to your own bishop, which is why Gabriel put it on a dark square opposite to the bishop. But the downside of that is your bishop cannot defend this this pawn. There's no way for this light square bishop to defend the pawn. Now, it doesn't block the pawn, which is why usually you put it on the opposite color square so that you complement each other. But here, let's see it again. Rook goes to c4, and now bishop e5, rook drops back to c8, and Yang Yi fixes the pawn with a4. Now, it's really hard for black to find a plan here. So this is one of those endgames where you don't have to rush. There's some endgames where it's a race, but you need to recognize where you don't have to rush. So here you don't have to rush, and Yang Yi can just slowly, gradually build up his advantage. And he's already established, I'm going to fix this pawn, put my bishop on c3, and then activate my pieces. So rook comes to c5, hitting the bishop, but the bishop wants to go to c3 anyway. And now black tries to activate the king. King goes to h7. And then here we limit black's activity with this key move, rook to d6. And there's no immediate threat with this move. But just putting this rook on the 6th rank is a fantastic way to limit black. This f pawn can't move anymore, right? And also, if this rook ever moves, this rook on a8, the white rook could always swing to a6, and suddenly the pawn is lost. So this is like paralyzing black already. King comes out to g6, and now Yang Yi also improves his king with king to f2, and pawn comes out to h5. And now we need to decide how do we deal with this kingside pawn structure. Normally you want to avoid pawn trades when you're ahead, but here g4 is potentially coming at some moment, and that would be very annoying. And now Yang Yi makes a big decision. He goes g4, and it fixes this pawn on g5 as well. It allows one pawn trade, but then there's no other pawn trades that can happen. This f pawn can't come up to trade because of this super annoying rook on d6. So takes, and notice Yang Yi is fixing these pawns on dark squares where the bishop is going to be able to attack them, and this bishop can't defend. Rook comes to d5, and trading is an option here. One thing is you don't want to trade off both rooks. You almost never want to trade off both rooks, because if you reach just a pure bishop ending, it's super drawish when it's opposite color bishops. So Yang Yi declines to trade because this rook is so good on the 6th rank. And there's nothing black can really do here, so he kind of just has to shuffle with his pieces while Yang Yi continues to improve. He brings in the other rook, rook shuffles again, this rook is gradually improving, and what happens is this rook goes here to here to here to here. And it looks super slow, but the thing is, what we mentioned before, there's no rush. You've paralyzed the opponent. So now you just use your time to get the optimal setup. King shuffles around, doesn't really do much. It's more shuffling. Yang Yi places the king on g3 temporarily, and now the rook is heading into this beautiful square on c6. And here the evaluation is already like gawking. It's like completely won, and it's just insane, right? In like 10 moves, it's from like a drawn position. But the way Yang Yi handled this is so instructive. Like, first limit black's play, activate your pieces, activate this bishop by realizing where the bishop needs to go, fix the weakness, right? Continue rerouting, and then activate the pieces, fix another weakness, and then activate your final piece. And like, black hasn't done anything wrong here. You notice like the chess.com engine doesn't say that black made any major mistakes, but it's just been like deadly how Yang Yi's played this. And let's see how he finishes him off. So you've obtained the optimal setup. How do you finish the job? There's probably multiple ways now. Yang Yi starts by shuffling around, creating some small threats. So here there's a threat of rook takes e6. In these positions, as long as you maintain control, there's no big rush. He puts the king on e3, which is a slightly better square potentially than g3. And now we're gonna start going in on these weaknesses on the fifth rank. And here, in a way, actually, black is in a weird almost zigzag, because essentially this rook if this rook moves, this rook is gonna come to a7 and collect this free pawn. And this king can't move. If the king can't go to h7 because we take because of this pin. Potentially to h6. h6 is not possible as well because of this pin this way. So the king's completely stuck. The bishop can't move. The pawn can't move. This rook can't get off the a file. So actually, in this position, this rook is the only piece that can move without immediately losing material, which is why Gabriel played rook d1. But now he's given up the 5th rank. So now Yang Yi decides, okay, time to start collecting, right? The rooks come onto the 5th rank. He doesn't even rush with rook b5 here. He actually optimizes this as, again, rook e5, because it's a slightly better square than putting it on the c file. And then he doubles up on the rook. And then all these pawns that he's fixed, you see how he's fixed these, are about to drop dead in the water. This pawn cannot be taked, because rook takes g5 is going to be deadly here with this king. So bishop comes to d7, but we react by attacking this bishop. And now Gabriel tries to trade some pieces because these rooks are just killer with this bishop on c3. And here it just requires a little bit of calculation. Take, there's a check. Don't blunder by playing your king to d4 and getting the rook skewered. Play the king back to d2 and you have a completely winning rook ending, because not only are you 2 pawns up, but black is left with these 2 weaknesses, which you're just going to play rook f5 and collect even more pawns. So yeah, super beautiful endgame by Yang Yi to secure the win. Really clutch win, 2.5, 1.5, by winning that ending which looked like a draw. The next game I'm gonna show you is by Wei Yi. Wei Yi might be a future world champion because he's just so good on every aspect of the game. He's actually more known for like attacking chess and the initiative, but the endgame display on here is phenomenal. So China's playing Spain, and the game starts off as an accelerated dragon. And David Anton, a fantastic Spanish grandmaster, plays this accelerated dragon wonderfully. And actually, like, he completely equalizes from the opening, actually. And Wei Yi has to kind of just liquidate and be really careful not to be worse. He's actually close to being worse here. There's a slightly worse pawn structure, but this king is not good, and this queen is fantastic. But Wei Yi finds a brilliant move, h4, to kick the queen from the optimal square. And David Anton retreats to h6, and then Wei Yi is thinking about doubling up, so the exchange comes, and we get this interesting pawn structure, where both sides have weaknesses, and the queens are coming off. Yeah, so here we need to defend c4, and the computer just gives zeros here. It just says 0.00. And when I saw this live, I was thinking, oh, it looks like a draw. And the match situation, it was 1.5, 1.5. So it looked like the match is going to be a 2-2 draw, which is not a terrible result against Spain, but China probably want to try and go for the gold medal. But like Wei Yi just turns on the heat here. He just turns on his engines. And like, let the chess do the talking, and you'll see. So first of all, like, king comes over. This pawn can't be taken because the rook's defending on c4. That would be a super easy draw. King comes close, and king comes to e7. So you reach this position, and you have to kind of assess. I mean, in terms of pawn islands, it's exactly the same. There's 1 pawn island, 2 pawn island, 3 for white. And then for black, it's 1 pawn island, 2 pawn island, 3 for black. There's a tiny, like, space advantage, if you can even call it that. But it just looks like both sides have weaknesses. It's going to be a draw. But, like, Wei Yi finds, like, a super nice plan here. And it's to do with weaknesses. Like, where is black's weakness in this position? This pawn is much further ahead. and this c pawn is cutting off support for the pawn. So we need to come and round up this pawn. And super simple plan. King comes over to pressure the pawn. King comes to d3. And now David Anton, he sees what's happening and he comes up with a plan to deal with it. And it looks like a very good plan. There's kind of multiple ways to deal with this plan. Probably the most kind of optimal way to deal with it is drop the rook back, and after king c3, play the pawn to b5. Try and swap off a bunch of these pawns, and after something like this happens, then you drop the bishop back and keep this pawn, and the rook comes to b8 to check. And here it's still slightly awkward actually, because now you end up with the 3 pawn islands against white's 2 now, but it should be holdable because there's no way for white to round up this pawn. David Anton picks bishop d7 first, and now Wei continues with king c3, and the point of bishop d7 is here to play b5 as well. And actually, if you just continue marching with the king, it's very similar to the other position. Takes, rook drops back, and you can check, and the bishop is defended. But this very, very small inaccuracy, if you can even call it that, where he picks up on, and after b5 he finds this killer sequence, and this is like understanding of endgame combined with calculation here. He goes rook d5, and now you can't take this pawn is a very important point, because after recapturing this pawn and this pawn is dead, right? The king comes to b4. So he takes advantage of this one clutch moment. The rook has to drop back. Rook drops back, and now Wei finds this move, e5. So it's pressuring on d6. This pawn has to take. It forces the pawn to take, and then rook takes on e5. And it's really awkward now, because if the king goes to the f file, the point is, instead of trading this pawn, I'm gonna push c5. And if I push c5, you're done for, because I haven't let you trade off these weaknesses, right? My king sits on b4, I'm gonna collect, and I've got this killer pass pawn. So David Anton correctly finds king d6 to stop c5, but then rook comes back to d5 check. And now that there's a very difficult decision for black. The king can go to e6 or e7. It can't go to c6 because he dropped the pawn. Same for c7. So you've got to go to e6 or e7, but they're both pretty awkward, because if you go to e6, right, after the line king b4, forcing you to take here, and bishop takes, this is lined up against your king. So you have to spend another tempo to drop the king back to e7. And after bishop b5, Wei is going to collect this pawn on a4. But the one saving grace for black here is that the bishops come off the board. And actually this endgame should be drawable. It's not trivial by any means. And like, if I'm sitting across Wei, I'm gonna be really sweating. But this is the way for David Anton to save this ending. He's got to liquidate into this rook ending. There's no way to save this pawn, because the rook can come to a5 at any moment to take the pawn. But if you play this accurately, with the rooks kind of behind the pawns, keep this rook active, it should be drawable. But Wei is going to press on here. And David Anton here, he goes king to e7. And now the difference is the king does not stay pressuring the rook, which allows Wei to play c5. And now we've kept these weaknesses on the board. Bishop comes to e6, rook goes to e5, and after f6, actually David Anton gets to win this pawn. But the problem is both these pawns drop, because the king is on b4 and this king is inactive. So rook moves, bishop takes on b5, and the other pawn gets collected. And we get a very similar endgame to the other one I showed you that David Anton could have gone for, but the difference is the bishops on the board. And with bishops on the board, this endgame is not drawish at all. This endgame is completely winnable now. And Wei plays this with great technique. It's already winning, but he just controls this beautifully. He doesn't allow like black to snap up these pawns and get crazy pawns of his own. He keeps going. He only gives the pawn at the right moment when this pawn is going to queen. Check to defend the bishop, and pawn keeps marching up the board. And now David Anton is trying to create some pawns, but Wei just shows great technique here. I'll just show the moves because it's winning already. But essentially, collect some pawns, hit the bishop, and prepare to make a queen. And this other pawn is pretty key as well, because if this pawn is gone, right, this bishop trades for this pawn, and bishop and rook against rook is a draw. But the technique here is phenomenal. Keep the pawn again, can't give up that pawn, and force this pawn through with bishop c6. And here there's a small moment where it looks like black's making a queen, but here you play bishop g2 to stop the pawn, where his calculation is perfect. Rook takes. Black actually makes the queen first, but you have an extra rook and a pawn, and there's no perpetual check. So in this position, David Anton resigns, and trying to clinch another win from an endgame, 2.5, 1.5. So yeah, endgames, guys. I'll see you in the next one.